Professor Stephen C. Hayes is a foundation professor of psychology at the University of Nevada, Reno. He's the originator and the co-developer of Acceptance and Commitment Therapy, or ACT. He's the author of nearly 50 books and 700 scientific articles. Methods he developed are distributed worldwide by the World Health Organization and other major agencies, and he's ranked as one of the most cited psychologists in the world. So, Steve, I'm really happy to be here today with you.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
As a first question, I would like to start this interview quoting you. At the end of your first TED Talk and in many of your emails and CBS listserv messages we have read, love isn't everything, it's the only thing. How can love be so important for human beings? And how can it be related to ACT?
Yeah, well, thank you for the question. And it, it's a play on a famous football coach here in the United States who said winning isn't everything, it's the only thing, which I was a bit horrified by. But I've challenged my students to talk about what the core message of psychological flexibility and of ACT, what it is, and to distill the model down, make it simpler. And I gave my students the challenge of see if you can get it down to one word, and even can you get it down to a single letter. And I myself had done this exercise and was pleased to see that they came to the same answer I did, which is the word is love. If you want a letter, the letter B will work pretty well. I think there's a common core in humanity. There's a way that things work for us and a way that things don't work for us. And psychology has spent so much time categorizing what is normal and abnormal on some sort of bell curve or distribution and sorting people into normal and abnormal, instead of digging down to the processes that empower people, the steps that people can take that empower them. And ACT has been on a different journey. We've been from the beginning trying to find out what those small set of processes are, the smallest set that do the most things. And the psychological flexibility model gives you 6 primary things. There's others that you can add. But if you really look at them and think about, how do you feel when somebody accepts you for who you really are, when they don't judge you? Where when they're with you, they're really with you in that moment. They're not looking at their watch, wondering when the meeting will end. Or when your eyes meet the person that you're meeting, that you see a human being there who's conscious of their time with you, and vice versa, that you're connected in consciousness. And when you know that your values, what's important to you, wouldn't be overridden by that person. They care about what you care about, and that you could be together in ways that fit the opportunities of the situation. It doesn't have to be decided beforehand in some rigid way. Well, those 6 things are the 6 flexibility processes. And I would say, you put yourself in that situation, you're going to feel loved and cared for by that person. If you think about the people who lift you up in your life, your grandmother, or your therapist, or your spouse, or your sibling, or your friend, or when these features I've just pointed to are present, you feel loved. And when you do things like that to yourself, you feel loving towards yourself. So I think I'm buoyed up, lifted up by the fact that you can take a science journey, arrive at these processes, learn how to put them in human beings' life, and then you end up where the people who write songs, or who make movies, or who paint pictures or do dances for us, the great artists, the people who've influenced humanity for the millennia, you end up arriving at the same place they arrive at. I mean, how many authors, poets, song makers, dancers arrive at a similar place in which love is at the core of human experience. It's what's of importance to us. So I put it at the bottom of my emails to remind me, but also to let other people know that that's what I think is important. And they can hold me to account to it. If they send me an email, I'm going to try to do something loving in return. For one thing, I'm going to answer the email, which is a little hard to do when you get known around the world. But I do it. And I do it because of what those words mean for me. You know, I don't always live up to them. I don't mean that. I often don't. Ask my wife. But I know they matter. And I think the science underneath our work shows they matter.
Thank you for your answer. And speaking about love and commitment, in October 2022, it will be 40 years from your first ACT workshop in North Carolina.
Yes, October. We're on just a little bit away from the very first ACT workshop, 40 years.
How did the ACT approach idea come about, and which values led you to the development of ACT?
Well, I was seriously interested as a young professional in how language and cognition, how human thought uh, interacted with learning systems that were much, much older, more ancient, in ways that made it hard to be human. I was interested in why is it hard to be human, and that interest became very close and personal when I developed a panic disorder and went through 3 years of hell. Nothing so special. It's, I mean, as common as dirt. Almost everybody hits times in their life when they're struggling, and that was a time when I certainly was. But I had gotten into psychology because I saw how much suffering was in my home. My mother and father, loving people, but very hard to get out of their own way, to really be kind to each other. Things I've learned about even recently about my mother's life are really quite shocking. She was carrying a tremendous burden, as was my dad. And I think most psychologists become psychologists because they're wondering, why is it so hard to be human? Or, what could we do to really lift people up? And sometimes it's because of their own story, and sometimes because, probably even more common if these decisions are made early in life, of what they see around them. And so that journey put me on trying to understand what these processes are. And I had made some progress. I came out of a wing of psychology, behavior analysis, that was always process focused, that was always idiographic, which makes it a little easier. It also makes it unusual. It's not such a big wing. It's an unusual wing. And it's one that sometimes I think has been too rigid and been stuck in the past. I mean, there's problems in the behavioral tradition, but there's great strengths. And I chose it because early as a student, I thought, oh man, if they could do that, if they could figure out what the processes were that really lift people up, that'd be enormously helpful. I mean, I ran animal studies as an undergraduate. I actually built with my own hands an animal lab when I was an undergraduate, and bought the rats and figured out how to get them fed every week and ran those studies. But what made me a behaviorist was Walden 2. And so this idea from rats to Walden 2, that you can understand basic things that then say things about how to raise children or how to create loving relationships and so forth, was a focus. Well, coming out of my own panic disorder, though, it really became critical. And I was lucky enough, I think, to stumble into a possible way forward with human language, relational frame theory, and to have had training as a hippie era person, in psychedelics, the human potential movement, Esalen, Gestalt therapy, all these different kinds of humanistic therapies, some of which were influenced by behavioral people historically. It's not like this was brand new to put these together, but I was lucky enough to combine some of these more humanistic, existential kind of moves with a process focus. And that gave me a way forward personally for me. I've told that story in my TED Talk, that transformational moment. I'm not going to run from me. And I don't think that's so unusual. I think it's actually kind of a common insight that people sometimes have with spiritual experiences of all kinds. I mean, if you just look at the modern work on psychedelic therapy, for example, as an old hippie, I was not doing those things as part of therapy, but I was experimenting with those things. When people see something that was profound in psychedelic therapy, it's very often because of some sort of sense of oceanic awareness, connection across time, place, and person, a sense of oneness, community, a lack of separation. Well, that is in that moment of the lowest point of my life in my panic disorder. So I'm going on too long, but coming out of that, I saw something. I saw that this evolutionarily recent thing of language and cognition and the sense of self that it creates in these narrative stories that we have about how we need to be in order to be able to belong and be cared for and be part of the group, to be loved, we could say, were often very repertoire narrowing. They squeeze you down. They make you kind of put on a fake face and hope that people will include you if you do it well enough. But then you don't really feel as though they know you because you've been trying to get there by, manipulation, not by authenticity. And pretty soon, it was less than a year after my hitting bottom and my panic disorder, I was trying to apply these things. Well, really, literally in months later, I was trying to apply these things with my clients because I was still seeing clients even at the height of my panic struggles. Oddly enough, I was known for treating anxiety disorders. They came to me in large numbers, probably because I knew what it was like. But then within less than a year, I was out there trying to train people in how to think about things this way. And in that 40-year journey, things have been added or, that are more central focus. I think, focus on the present moment, that came in a little later. It wasn't, if you had been in that first workshop in 1982, you wouldn't have seen that. But and the community has developed it tremendously with so many methods and so on. So it's a living, breathing thing. That's why I say, while I may have originated it, I only co-developed it, because persons like yourself are developers of ACT, and there's many, many hands now, many fingerprints, thousands of fingerprints on that. I think where we end up with ACT because of that arc is a little different, because I think we have one of the most process-focused methods, and the processes are cast in such broad ways. I've often said, I was just looking at the CBS website where it defines the 6 core processes and gives a definition of ACT, and it says right there, it's not a technology, it's a model, and using methods to to increase psychological flexibility is at the core of the ACT work, however you do it. Well, that means that as the process grows, our knowledge grows, the method grows. ACT is not a stable thing. It moves. It moves with the knowledge we have about how best to understand and move psychological flexibility processes. And that is raising a challenge for us right now, because it turns out those processes are so central and so broadly applicable that ACT is gradually beginning to expand to include more and more of evidence-based therapy. But that's how it happened. And in terms of lighting the match and starting the little fire, how the bonfire happened is thousands of people bringing their ideas and putting a log on the fire. So the reason there's almost 1,000 randomized trials and all that kind of thing is because the community created it. And maybe that's because people see love isn't everything, it's the only thing. And that these flexibility processes are relevant to their lives and the lives of those they serve.
Thank you, Steve. What is your favorite aspect? What do you love most about ACT? And on the other hand, what do you think can be the most difficult aspect for clients and clinicians using ACT?
Well, they're one and the same. My favorite aspect, not because it's easiest, but because I think it's most profound, and the one that is most difficult, is a witnessing, noticing, observing sense of self that is transcendent. I mean, because of my history with my panic disorder, etc., acceptance work and diffusion work is very, very important. And for all of this to really make a difference, values work and putting it into your life is very important. But the pivot point that allows you to come into the present moment and to apply these openness skills to being able to create a life worth living, the pivot point, I think, is sense of self. And there's a sense that is very difficult even to talk about that comes out of ACT theory. The sense of self we're talking about is not the objectified, noticed, evaluated, and described sense of self. It's the no thing self. It's that which has no limits or edges. Your more spiritual dimension, you might say. And I think I'm entirely comfortable with that word. Even speaking as a monistic person, I don't think it's dualistic to speak of spirituality. And the very, very first article ever written on ACT was called Making Sense of Spirituality. And I think it's because, when my transformational moment, it was a spiritual kind of awakening. It was noticing that the kind of chattering monkey mind version of self, that the one that said I had to achieve or I had to be this way or that way in order to be welcome on the planet, was a part of me claiming to be all of me. And as a part that I want my logical, reasonable, problem-solving, analytic, judgmental mind. I want that when I'm doing my taxes or fixing my car. I want those things. But I don't believe that that is who I am. It's a skill set, and it's part of what I do. Well, who are you, really? What is a person, really, in a psychological sense? And that, of course, you can find it just by the boundary of the skin or this organism. But from the inside out, who are you? And finding that there's a sense of self that is interconnected, that that doesn't have those same boundaries, that you're part of a we by birth, you're a human being, and we're brought into consciousness by others, by other members of the tribe. And when they brought you into consciousness, they brought you in with this I hear now awareness. They helped establish it. You had seeds of it before language, but language built it out. Being able to sort of settle into that is inherently a loving thing to do. It's inherently an accepting thing to do. It's inherently a diffused thing to do. It inherently puts you into the present moment. It's the place from which values choices are possible, and which you can play the game of building larger and larger habits of values without feeling as though you're broken and you'll only be whole when all these other things are done, as if you're only part of a jigsaw puzzle and every piece has to be placed before you're whole. No, you're whole already, because there's no division or differentiation in the kind of consciousness that human beings have. The story of the evolution of humanity is the story of the evolution of consciousness. And the kind of consciousness that's involved in this more spiritual, witnessing, noticing sense of self is one that I think is only human beings have, even though it builds on processes that other living creatures have. And it's put us into an amazing journey as a species, which if we can connect with and move from, and this is something that every mystic, every person who's had a spiritual experience seems to say, if you can just be who you are. There's so many things that are conflicted and difficult in the world that will be resolved. You will still live and die. You're a finite being, but you can do it inside of a journey that's playful and joyful and also sad, and also all the human emotions, but that is human and is worth your time on the planet. So now when you talk about that, that's not it. And I enjoy the etymology of words, as you probably know. And about means near, but out. So any word about is not in, it's out. That's why the out is there, and out. So if you enter into human consciousness fully, like what happens with a deep spiritual experience that's transformational, you learn something that you never forget. And you will talk about it, but it's not an it. And to be inside this self as context is to enter into common humanity and to experience that the way you experience your next breath, in a way that's unquestioned, to experience it the way you experience the floor when you take your next step. You take it inside the confidence that your foot will land on the floor. You don't do it expecting the floor to disappear underneath your feet. And in the same way, there's a so-ness of this dimension of living that is inherently affirmative. And to go back to the beginning of the conversation, that's inherently loving, affords you the ability, I think increases your ability to be loving towards others, but it's inherently loving towards yourself, because it's no longer conditional. It's not like you're only part of a person. It's not like you're broken and you'll be a whole person when you publish that next paper, or get that girlfriend to decide that oh yeah, you're the one, or whatever the thing is. None of those things. No, it's more like taking a breath or standing on the floor. There's a reality, a so-ness, a wholeness, a complete quality. that is unquestioned. Now that sounds spooky when you talk about it, but it's not. It's so common that almost everybody has had these experiences. It's just the mind doesn't understand it, and so it jabbers at you about what does that really mean, and should you trust it, and so on and so on and so on. And then if you're a little wiser, you take the next breath and you take the next step and you live your life inside the experienced reality of being who you are. You don't have to earn that. It's a birthright. You're already there. You know, we spend our lives trying to get somewhere where we already are. It's really kind of silly, but I think if people can take that step, then their journeys, let's say just in therapy, that they come to us for, like, oh, I'm so depressed, I'm so anxious. Now it's changed fundamentally. Yes, we're going to work on, how you deal with depressed mood. Yeah, we're going to deal with that. Yes, we will deal with how you deal with your racing heart or things you call anxiety. Yeah, we would deal with that. But we'll do it inside a knowledge that you're a whole being who's thoroughly made. You're not broken. You don't have to earn your right to exist. And in a way, if therapy is successful, that's where you're going to end up anyway. I mean, that's what you'd want anyway. So we can start there and then end up there and do good work. If I could say one more thing, the values part of the work, sometimes people think of this of, oh, if I just do my values, then I'll have done enough things that I'll kind of put it all together. It's actually more like, if you can start from where you are, really, then it's a natural thing to say, what are the qualities I want to manifest? And as a kind of game, you manifest them. Not because it earns you a right to exist, but because it's a fun thing to do with your life's moments. Children, when given the opportunity, will play very naturally. They'll run to a tree to try to get there before you tag them, for example. It's not because it's really important. They know it's not really important, but they're pretending it's important. So, what are we going to pretend it's important? Like, I think it might be kind of fun to alleviate human suffering. Why not? That's a game worth playing. It isn't like you then earn your keep. No, it's more like, now that you're finished, you can play, and you can play at the things that are big. Not because they have to be big, or because if they're big enough, then you've earned your keep, but because why not? How do you serve the world by playing small? And, is there enough love in the world that all these things we struggle with can be solved if we all are free to be who we really are? I don't know, but let's find out. That's the act journey, I think. And that's just the act journey. That's the role of psychotherapy. That's the role of psychology. That's the role of humanity. That's the journey humanity is on, is how to bring consciousness into a world where that can be what we're about, and not our wars and our or belonging and harming others and ourselves in that effort.
Thank you, my friend.